Inspiration, clarity, confidence, and wholehearted growth strategies. Welcome to Your Next Chapter, the show especially for women discovering, deepening, and expanding their next chapters in business and life. If this is you, then hit subscribe now. I'm your host, Angela Rasmus, and I'm so glad you're here. Hello and welcome to episode 106 of the Your Next Chapter podcast. This, of course, is Angela. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I really appreciate you lending me your ears. And the conversation that I'm having today with the gorgeous Sarah Denholm, who's down in Melbourne in Australia, is one that has a double benefit for you. Now, whenever I'm recording these conversations, I'm always looking for that kernel of inspiration for you to be able to hear how other people have had these new ideas on a new direction that they want to go into for their next chapter. Now, sometimes it's just a wee pivot, maybe a new service, a new slice of the market that you're looking to serve. But sometimes it's a great big leap of faith in a very new direction. And I find it personally really inspiring to hear the stories behind the scenes and to understand how this change of direction came about. So you certainly get that in spades from Sarah today, because she originally trained as a classical pianist, but it was because her music career in the 90s was nearly ruined by performance anxiety that she had to go in another direction. Now, at first, that wasn't what she anticipated. She simply went to learn how to overcome her own fears, learn to be seen, learn to be heard by speaking in public, and believed that that would be the way to reboot her own music career. But what happened was a lot of people began to notice the very significant changes in those levels of confidence and presence. And they started asking Sarah, how did that happen? So this whole new chapter opened up where she actually pivoted entirely and now absolutely focuses on helping other people overcome that fear of public speaking and not only polish their skills, but really take them to a whole new level. So that's what I mean by the two pieces in this conversation for you. On one hand, yes, the inspiration of starting a next chapter, which we all need to hear to help us stay on our own path when that vision sometimes seems so far away. But the second half is some really fabulous tips on things that you can do to anchor yourself in confidence when it comes to speaking. Now, as a woman in business, myself, yourself, being seen, being heard, sharing your message, making sure that the people who you are here to serve have the opportunity to invite you into their world, it's just such a key part of our marketing strategy. Now, that doesn't always mean that you stand up on a stage and have thousands of people listening to you, though that sounds like fun. But it can also be as simple as starting a podcast, pushing record on that Facebook Live, doing an audio, speaking up at your local networking event, whatever it looks like for you. Having a voice that you feel confident about projecting into the world is incredibly important. So some of these tips that Sarah shares today, I really recommend that you got a pen and paper handy so you can write them down, catch them, and then put them into action, so that your own next chapter can see a new level of visibility for you. So really hope you enjoy this conversation and really looking forward to seeing or hearing rather any feedback that you have about the aha moments that you had when you were listening in. Now, this is coming up to some of the final Next Chapter podcasts for the year. One of the things that's really important to me is to take a good break over the Christmas period so that the plans that I have, gestating in the back of my head, have some breathing space so that I can come back and visit them in January and relook and decide, is that really how I want my 2020 to look? Now, a big part of that 2020 for me is making sure that I have the support that I need behind the scenes to help me show up and be seen and heard every day. And for me, that means being in a very supportive and ongoing mastermind. Now, I've been running masterminds for 6 years now. 2020 will be my 6th year. And I've been in masterminds myself for almost the same length of time. To me, they are one of the most magnificent ways to get strategic and emotional support as I'm growing or consolidating my business. Now, I would really love you to lean into that concept and see if a mastermind perhaps is the right fit for you as well. Mine are open at the moment. I'm taking new people, booking them in to start off with us in 2020. So if that sounds interesting to you, pop along to my website and have a wee look. You'll find the masterminds under Work With Me on my website. And I'd really love to have a conversation with you to see if that type of support wrapped around you for the new year could help you, much like Sarah, learn to be seen and heard and step into your own power. But that's enough from me. Let's listen in to this wonderful conversation and see what will unfold in your next chapter when you take some of these ideas and put them into action. Take care. I'll talk to you again very soon. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Your Next Chapter podcast. Today we are having the most amazing conversation. I know this, even though the conversation hasn't happened yet, because I've had the pleasure of meeting my guest. We met at a dinner, a Next Chapter Salon dinner that I ran down in Melbourne a couple of months ago. And as soon as I started to hear Sarah's story, I knew I had to have her as a guest on the podcast. So many of us are sitting on the edge of our next chapter and we have this feeling of, I want to pivot over in that new direction. And sometimes we wonder, is it possible? Are my dreams really possible? Is this a sensible thing to do? Well, I'm here to tell you, absolutely. You can make that significant move that you've been thinking of. Of course, you can make some of those little moves as well. But if you've got that desire to go in a whole new direction, then you are going to love to hear what happened with Sarah. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Angela. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm sure it's going to be exciting for both of us. We had a wee chat before we pushed record, because at my feet I have a brand new little puppy, and this is my first podcast where I'm having to wonder if anything will happen, if there'll be special sound effects in the background. So
quite possibly.
Let's see what he has to say, but let's concentrate on us first. So Sarah, we did get that opportunity to meet down at dinner, and you were giving me some insight in terms of what your previous chapters were. So I'd love you to start there. Everyone that I speak to on the podcast has a story to tell, which is what this is all about. So take us back in time. Where were you before you became the person you are today?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes. So I grew up deciding that I was going to be a classical pianist, and that is eventually where I went. And I went to music college in the UK in the 1980s, so showing a bit of my age here, so late 80s. And I always suffered some performance anxiety, but I kind of coped and I pushed through. And music college, people often think that music is a friendly and welcoming environment, because that when they're not in that business, that's how they see it. But in fact, it is very cutthroat, and music college I found really quite challenging. So while I was doing well, and I ended up, I got my degree and I went off and I started doing chamber music and performing and some teaching, but I always found it, I loved it, but I found it stressful as well. And then I also suffered severely from anxiety at one point, performance anxiety. And what happened was that my whole body came out in eczema, and eczema is a very unsexy disease. It's very unpleasant as well, and to be in it, it's very difficult. And I actually ended up being hospitalized a couple of times, and when I think about it now and I go back to it, I still find it stressful to even think about. But I had eczema all over my body and I couldn't really function. And the way that then eventuated was that I lost my nerve. So I was pumped full of steroids and I was put in the skin hospital in Manchester, and not a very pleasant place to be, as you can imagine. And then when I came out, I wasn't cured, but I was much improved. And I found that I couldn't perform. I found it incredibly hard. And I think that because when I was performing on stage and I was going downhill, and my skin looked terrible, I always felt that the audience were looking at me, which they would have been, with either, pity or horror or a combination of the two. And I just lost my nerve. I didn't like people looking at me. So I had to find a way back. And that way back was learning how to speak in public, because I couldn't do that either. I was the most appalling speaker, and I really struggled. So I started doing that. I kept doing the music, which I still really enjoyed, and I was back to performing and teaching, and I was coping really quite well. But I ended up finding that the the coaching of what I started to do with other people, because they started to say to me, how have you overcome this performance fear? And I started talking about public speaking and the things that I'd learned. And it just sort of naturally morphed and evolved. And eventually I went, you know what? I trained as a life coach very early on in 1990s, I think it was, late 90s. But I never really found a niche, and I found that it was just too broad. But I knew I wanted to help people in a way that involved words and didn't just involve music. So I thought, okay, I'll do public speaking training. And I'd never really thought about it before, but I thought, look, give it a go. I'm not a natural risk taker at all. I love security. That was always important to me. And while I never had massive security as a pianist or indeed as a teacher, I always felt that, well, this is what I do. This is what I'm good at. Don't rock that boat, because the thought of being an entrepreneur was frankly terrifying. Going into my own business, I thought, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. It's just too hard. But so what I did was I just kept the music going, and then I just started to gradually transfer and started my public speaking business in, I think, 2010. So it's been going pretty much 10 years now, and I have moved almost fully into that. I do some music now, but really it's just for fun. So long answer to your short question.
It's great to see that the journey, as you laid that out, we can see the different points along the way when there were challenges that you needed to face. And what I'm hearing in your story is an enormous amount of courage, a very big dose of bravery through that. Now, I had eczema and asthma. The two of them seem to come together, but never to the extent that you're talking about. And that must have been incredibly debilitating to be in that situation. And I can understand entirely how, when you came back, that natural anxiety, which I believe for anyone who was performing anything, that is a part of the experience overall. But to have that then coupled with a challenge like that, I don't find it at all surprising that ramped up in terms of you finding it really difficult to go from there. But the thing that I see and I note and I applaud is that some people would naturally run away from that. I mean, figuratively, if you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely.
And that would be completely and utterly understandable to have such compassion for that scenario. But you didn't. But you didn't. So how did you actually turn that situation of, I'm really afraid of this, so instead of actually moving away from it, I'm going to move towards it. I'm going to ensure that I get these skills so I can make this leap. What was that experience like when you were looking around for, how am I going to overcome this fear and move in that direction?
Yes, and I think that, well, the initial answer would be that I really forced myself by looking ahead into the future and thinking, if I don't do this, and hopefully I get to, old age and I look back and I go, I didn't try it, that I would have had so much regret. And that eventually pushed me out of a comfort zone. But I have to say, I was a very slow learner. Like, I still was much more comfortable. It was, I think I was much more comfortable sitting on the couch and just going, okay, I don't need to push myself. But I think one of the other things I did too was that I actually rearranged my values in my mind, and I went, okay, that my value has always very powerfully been security and safety, but that's not going to get me what I want. So I rearranged it, because learning is another one of my values, and I love learning. I love researching. I love books. I could just, I could read all day and make notes and make connections in my mind and go out and talk about that. And that's one of the things I get to do now, which is so beautiful. But I rearranged that, and I went, okay, well, if learning and growth are important to you, then you have to understand that that's going to involve fear. So whenever I felt that fear, which I did pretty much every day, I would say to myself, okay, remember that this means you're growing, and this is what you want. This is what you want. And this, if you just keep going and you take really small steps, which is also what I did, that you will end up somewhere so different. And if you only act, and this is often what I tell my clients who are afraid of speaking, that you almost don't need a lot of belief in the first place. You just need to take small steps consistently, and if you do that, then the belief comes, but because you're in a different place. But if you can't imagine that place before you do it, it's really hard to get yourself there. So I kind of went, well, I don't want to regret. I changed my values. I tried to create a vision of what it could look like. Though that was really hard to do. And then I just took action slowly. Yeah.
Oh, that is such a brilliant idea, that recognition, that self-awareness that you have, the recognition of here are my values and I need to move them around. I've not actually heard anyone that I've interviewed on the podcast or had this conversation with having that cognizant knowledge of here they are, I'm going to shift them. I'm going to reprioritize them. And what you're speaking to here is something that I'm so familiar with, the concept of that the actions of confidence come first and the feelings of confidence come later.
That's right. That's so true. And yes, it's one of my key things that I talk about and connect with clients on, because a lot of them, and particularly if they're introverted or they've had bad experiences. I had a client this morning who just had a really, really difficult mother and a really hard childhood and was very withdrawn and is afraid of speaking because basically she feels she hasn't got the right to be heard because of what's happened in the past. And it's this sense that you know, if you just take the action steps, you know, she's ready. So it's perfect.
I also love the fact that when you talked about the fact if we can't see it, it's hard to believe ourselves into it. So that need to create a vision for yourself, that part's really important. So when it comes to actually creating a vision, I don't believe that it's something that you just sit there and, you know, dream it up and then put it to one side and off you go. Did you find yourself revisiting it and visualizing it and like consistently reminding yourself in those moments of fear where you were going?
Yes, I had to, or I just would have stopped. There were so many times where I just went, this is so difficult for me. And as I say, I'm just not a natural entrepreneur. I have a lot of ideas in that way. I love going out, you know, investigating things, but I'm not that, because I think I have really quite a strong need for certainty, and a lot of being an entrepreneur is just about that willingness to be uncertain. I really struggled with that, you know. So if I had a bad day, it was just like it was a bloody roller coaster. It really was. And so on those bad days, sometimes I would just slump and go, okay, fair enough. But other days I would just, you know, remind myself. I'd use music. I'd think about my vision. I had and still have a supportive partner who's just been wonderful and has been really helpful in reminding and helping me along that journey. But it's certainly reminding. And even if the vision is super hazy, and it was for me, because I don't like being pinned down to things. I'm like, well, if I create a vision and I create, you know, that the certain things will happen then, and my life will look like this, and I'll live in this house with this view. Some of it's actually come true, but I didn't want to pin myself down, so I was very reluctant to be super clear on that vision. But even if it's hazy, it will still work.
That's a really good point, though, that idea of not locking down exactly how things should look. That how, there's actually, I've heard the expression before, beware of the dreaded hows.
I like that. I haven't heard that, yeah.
I think it was Mike Dooley from Infinite Possibilities who talks about this. And for me, the way I've always interpreted it is that if we have expectations that we hold too tightly, then we can miss opportunities because we're so fixated. This is how it has to look. This is how I'm going to get there. These are the steps that I'm going to take. I think we need to allow room into that vision. I love the way that you described that even though it wasn't super clear, and that's okay. We just want to take those steps. And so if we can let go of the expectations, that tightly held belief of how it has to look, then I think there is a much better opportunity for us to step into and to develop something that we didn't even know was possible.
Yes, that's so true as well. Yes, I totally agree with that, because I wouldn't have known that I would end up even working with, I would have said it was impossible. If you'd said to me, oh, you're going to end up working with these particular clients, so I would have gone, oh, no way. That's just not me. You know, that's not going to happen. But yes, you are right. It is. And tightly holding on to anything is, I have learned, I think, in my life, it's not always going to be a good thing.
I agree. I've had similar experiences. But oh my God, how hilarious that we want such certainty, but we choose a profession, i.e. being our own business, being a small business owner, where there is no certainty.
I know. I still sometimes, some days I go, oh, whoa. But, you know, it's worth it. And that's the thing. It has been so worth it. It's been an extraordinary journey.
Well, I've certainly seen so often. I know it's true in my case, and in so many of the clients that I work with, that next chapters or next chapter businesses are often built on skinned knees. So by that
Yes.
I mean that whatever your experience, your challenge was that you've worked through, that you've overcome, and then you realize, you suddenly turn around and go, "My goodness. Look how far I've come. Look what I've learned. I never thought this was
Yes.
possible. Who else might need this?" Now, you said that the
Yes.
transition for you was quite, it wasn't intentional. It was gradual. But talk to us about how that actually began to take place for you. That how did you, when you were starting this entrepreneurial journey of, you know what, I could teach this, people are asking me about it. How did you go about actually creating sort of that first chapter of your business?
Well, I mean, the first step was the website, because I knew I had to have something that really, really made it concrete for me. And gosh, you're making me go back a long way now. I'm thinking, what did I do? So I had the website, and I started, this is it. I started writing articles. And in those days, 2010, 2011, I got traction on Google really quite fast. And so I would watch my rankings go up and up in Google, and I ended up on page 1. So I got a lot of Google traffic. And, I had a coaching page, and I started a 5-week course, which is still going every quarter. I run those. And so what I did was I wrote articles, and people started hiring me on a very gentle basis as a coach. And then I started getting referrals, and it just kind of went from there. And I just allocated more and more time to that, and less time to the music, until it just gradually one took over from the other. But then I had to also make a leap and go, right, I'm now going to go completely full time. And I was working at a school just 2 days a week. And it was really hard to leave, because I loved the people. I loved the work. I knew exactly what I was doing, and how great is that when you feel really competent and you go, yeah, I know how to do this. I can get up, and I don't have to stress, and I don't, I can just go off and do the day. And my life isn't like that at all now. Like, it is quite stressful sometimes, and I come home and it's hard to shut off. So I guess that's probably the answer.
And I do like what I'm hearing, which I think is really important for us to highlight, is that there wasn't a jump off the cliff moment. I'm throwing it all away and I'm going to go fully into this. There was a transition. I believe it's very important when we are moving into a new area to allow, or starting a new business or a new enterprise, to not break the back of that new business. And by that, I mean having so much pressure on it, so much, there's the word expectations on it. It has to fulfill me. It has to make a difference. It has to pay me. It has to be everything. And that I've seen too many wee businesses that had so much potential, and lovely, lovely women who had so much to actually contribute, who have lost their heart because they tried to do everything at once so quickly and throw away the day job, or throw away, what they were doing before they gave the new venture a chance to actually blossom. And it seems that you didn't make that I hate to use the word mistake, but I'm going to use it anyway. That mistake of putting all those eggs over into that basket. That idea of the slow growth. Talk to me about that, like how that actually played out for you, because you talked about taking small, consistent steps, and how important is that?
Oh, look, well, certainly for my personality type, that was crucial, because, as I say, I'm not a risk taker. So anything that was just too hard, I would always avoid. And I had massive procrastination for, quite a long time. But when I started to move, it was, as I say, it was slow, because, I was not a fast mover. I did not rush out of the blocks and accelerate in terms of going, right, I'm going to contact, 50 people this week or whatever. I remember one morning I cold called, and I did that, I think I called 5 companies, big companies. Someone had said to me, well, call the top 100. So I called, even called the top 5. Oh my gosh. Even actually, when I talk about it, my hands start to sweat. It was terrible. It was so not me. And I remember the last one, I was so overwhelmed, and I think my hand was sweaty that the person said goodbye. No, thank you, we're not interested. And the receiver slipped out of my hand. I turned the phone. In those days, I was calling on a landline, and it clattered. It made this massive clatter as this woman was still on the phone. And I thought, right, that's it. I just can't cold call anymore. So I suppose I use that as an example of, I tried something and I went, no, that was just way too hard. And I backed off that for a long time, and I've never had to cold call since. So that has obviously been something that's worked. But I also read a book. There's a guy called David White. He's actually a Yorkshireman, but he is also a corporate poet. I think he's still doing it. He was working in corporate America, but he's written a few books, and I read one of his books. I loved his books because he writes poetry as well, and he brings poetry into his work. And while it's not something I know a lot about, it really resonated, this idea of having a music background and then, being able to sort of go over into the corporate field. And he said, look, when he was doing his transition, he said, if I just contact one person a day for 365 days of the year, or, take off the holidays, I'm going to be so far ahead after a year. And I thought, that's brilliant. I can do that because it's small and consistent. So that is one of the ways that I started to chip away at what I was doing, and it really does work. And it doesn't need to mean that you call someone you don't know, or it's just, it can be any sort of reaching out to people that you've worked with in the past, or just writing something on LinkedIn, or whatever it is, just taking an action step and reaching out to the world as well, because I'm a big believer in that if you open and you turn towards the universe and that energy which is there, that it will come back to you.
I share that belief with you as well. I definitely share that belief. And that's an important thing for us to understand, is that's the compound effect of small actions. Yes. As you said, you'll chip away. I love that philosophy of, if I just did that each day for a whole year, imagine how much further ahead I'll be. And I think and it's such an important thing for us to really hear, not just listen to, but really hear, because I think we underestimate what we can achieve in a year and overestimate what we can achieve in the next month. And,
isn't that so true? Yes.
Put so much pressure on, I should be further along. This should be easier. I should have faster growth.
Yes.
I think we can only, I remember hearing, I'm full of quotes today. I don't know what's happening to me, but life is lived forward, but it's understood backward.
Oh, yes.
And when you turn around, and I love the idea of looking back with hindsight and recognizing that we can't plan completely. No. We've obviously got to have, as you said, a vision. We've agreed that it needs to be a little bit roomy. We need to take actions. I'm a huge believer that when it comes to marketing, I'm a proponent of what I call wholehearted marketing. So you don't pull out the rule book and say, oh, okay, so I should be doing this and this and this. There's some basic foundations and guidelines. Like you said, let's have a website. Let's do some reaching out. Let's create some content, but not forcing yourself to do something that feels abhorrent. Yes. Like cold calling.
Calling, yeah, absolutely, exactly. I don't know why I did it, but anyway, yeah.
But we got to try. But we have to try these things, don't we? We need to try.
We do.
And I think, in my experience, there's a difference between something that just is completely not you versus something that's a bit tricky, and we need to develop the skills. And I really trust myself, and I think we can all trust ourselves to be able to see and feel the difference between those. It's not that we're, just too scared to do it. It's sometimes it just isn't our thing, and that's okay. We can find another way reaching the goal. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, that it's not prescriptive. That's true. And the other thing I should add about the cold calling is that one of those companies then contacted me a couple of years later, and I got work with them. So that really made me smile, because I thought, well, but I did it the right way around rather than actually, having to call them.
Well, that's that faith in being open and turning to the universe that you were also mentioning just a little while ago. They heard you.
They did, absolutely. And it's about that willingness to be visible. And unless you're visible, you can't help other people. And that's such a big part of my work, is helping women in particular just go, I have something to say, and this is how I want to say it.
I think that is the crux. And that's the piece I've found holds a lot of people back, that willingness to be visible. What have you found in your experiences that are those core reasons why people, women in particular, because that's who I work with all the time and you work with a lot of the time, what's some of the core reasons that hold women back from actually allowing themselves to be seen?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, it's everything, isn't it, from childhood and feeling that they weren't able to express themselves, right down to the fact that the culture is still quite male dominated, particularly in meetings. You know, I work a lot with women who do feel that what they say is not fully heard, and that they get interrupted. And of course, one of the things about creating space and presence, which is so important as a speaker, even whether you're in a meeting or whether you're giving a presentation, is that sense of space. But, you know, women will say to me, well, hang on, if I try and create space by pausing, you know, I just get leapt over and someone will move on and I have no chance to speak. So culture is definitely part of it. But also there's so much research now, isn't there, on this idea that women will not leap until they really believe they can do it. Whereas men, and in fact, I saw a guy on LinkedIn the other day saying, oh, you know, I never knew how to do anything in my work until I started it. You know, I just took the job. I went, yeah, I can do that. And then I learned and you know, we should all do that. And that's obviously we see that a lot. That's really common. But women, also because women tend to be more collaborative and men perhaps more competitive. And obviously I'm massively generalizing here that we don't necessarily like to put ourselves forwards and put ourselves up there and go, yes, here I am, I have something important to say. It's a tricky one, and it's complex. It is.
It is complex, you're right. It's not something that we can really unwrap and solve here. But I think what you were saying before about recognizing that we need to be visible to be able to help. That's if we can anchor ourselves into that. One of the techniques that I recommend is the GOS, which is the get off self. Because if we are focused on the fear that we have, the concern of how we'll be judged, you know, am I saying it right? Have I got it perfect? Whatever the dialogue is that's going on in your head, if we can notice that and pause and, you know, breathe and remind ourselves that I'm here for, and whoever the people are that you are here to help, I'm here for them. And if we can take ourselves into that space, it doesn't solve it, but I think it makes it a little easier. Do you think?
Oh, I definitely do. And it is hard to do. And again, a lot of my clients grapple with it. I still sometimes grapple with it because when we care about what we're doing and we do want to come across well, that really can get in the way. But yes, the whole idea about public speaking in particular is that really it is about your audience. I mean, unless you're a celebrity, and even then, I reckon, you know, it really is still about the audience, that if you can get yourself out of the way and think about your message and think about that connection factor. And I know connection, Angela, is something that you talk about a lot. And, you know, it's a major part of life, and it's a major part of success as a speaker. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. You still need that connection for people to be able to hear you.
Well, let's talk about that because public speaking as a skill set for us entrepreneurs, it's completely vital, and taking it out of the traditional context. It's not just about standing up and giving a keynote. Yeah, that's just one aspect of being a speaker. You know, it's being on a podcast, it's doing a video, it's meeting people at a networking event. There's so many different ways in which we need to be able to project ourselves, to communicate clearly, and most importantly, to have that connection factor. So for someone who's listening, who's recognizing, well, yes, I want to connect, I want to get across who I am and how I can help, what are some insights that you could share for us?
I think it almost starts with how you are in your body. Like if you can be relaxed and open in your body, then you're able to listen and tune in and actually really take in what the other person's saying, or indeed what an audience, even though they may not be actually speaking, having, and this is assuming that you're not you're not really scared, because if you're really scared, you will turn away. Usually you will turn away from your audience rather than turning towards them. But if you can open out and turn towards them and ground your body, the acting technique that you may be aware of, is, as well as breathing, is to feel your feet, to be really grounded. And if you can get out of your head and into your body and feel your feet and breathe and just be open. It's about attention, but attention in a way that's not tunnel visioned concentration, but open awareness attention. And often that's also to do with peripheral vision. I find that clients have said to me, I've worked with them on creating more presence, funnily enough, by actually using peripheral vision when they're speaking, which means that they're looking at the subject or whatever they're looking at, or their audience, but they're also aware of that space around them. And what that does is it diffuses that tunnel attention, that tunnel vision, and we actually can relax and be more open. And mentally, it's just that willingness to say, I turn towards you. I choose to turn towards you. I'm willing to do that. I don't know. Is that a bit woo-woo? Does that kind of make
No, not at all.
sense?
It's something, it makes perfect sense to me, especially that last piece. I choose to turn towards you. Yeah, I choose to share with you. I choose to connect with you. It is a choice.
It is.
And
yes.
that idea of grounding yourself, of really feeling your feet on the floor makes sense. I know one of my biggest challenges is getting out of my head. I have a very, very active head. That always.
Yes, me too. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's most of the time it's fun, but yeah.
but it's definitely, it's a growth edge for me. I'm in a mastermind which has got a very large focus on personal growth, which I love, because it's just one of my top values is learning and growing as well.
Yes.
And that's a big part of what we are being exposed to, is that connection between heart and head, to get out of, not to let go of the head, but to make sure that it is in harmony with the heart. And that is so important. And the breathing and the grounding yourself and reminding yourself that you choose to be here, that you're here to help, that there's people who need your message, the service that you have, and just reminding ourselves of that, bringing ourselves back to that. And that peripheral vision, I think that's so important. It's almost like softening the edges of your field of vision.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. That's right. And that allows your mind to soften and have that openness and that real awareness, but it's big awareness rather than laser point focus.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. And I think that can also happen even when you're doing a video. Like if you can imagine that you're connecting with someone on that, if you can like project that awareness as to the people that will be watching this, you can soften those fields again and do it that way. I think it can be used across the board without a doubt.
Definitely. Yes, I would agree.
So that's a great one. And how about messaging? Like when you're actually putting together a presentation, are there a couple of hints that you could give us in terms of how to structure things, how to structure your message in a way so that you are being mindful of how the audience receives it, not just about what it is that you want to communicate?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I certainly have different structures that I will use and give to clients depending on what they're trying to achieve. But I think maybe perhaps not even a structure, but like a framework that I would use is that the first one is that you need to have an absolute sense of clarity about what your key message is, because clarity, and it's funny because people go, well, of course I know what my message is, but when you actually delve deeply, often they don't, and they're just communicating information, they're conveying information. So clarity around your message is where I would always start, and for that, you need to then involve your audience, because you need to think as you're creating a presentation, well, what does my audience need? And need is an important word. It's like because basically in business, one of the key things that I use as one of my sort of mantras to live by in business is just that people just want you to make their lives easier. And if you can be that person in business, you're going to get asked back. You're going, it's just going to work. Your life is going to be so much easier. And it's the same with giving a presentation. If you think, how can I make the audience's life easy here? And whether that means that you don't clutter your slides, or you have your messaging so that it's super clear, you have really clear transitions between your points so that people can actually, if they've zoned out and they're thinking about what they're about to have for lunch, and they're, and then you say, right, so we've just covered X, now let's move on to the second part and look at this. They'll go, oh, thank God, thank you. So you're giving them what I call a signpost in the sea, so that a lot of presentations are just like the waves are crashing in regularly onto the shoreline, and we just hear the speaker's words and we get lulled. Whereas if you can create signposts for them, that clarity is really going to help them. So my framework would be clarity, connection. So what are they needing along with the clarity? Then you create contrast, which keeps them engaged, and that's contrast in delivery, in time frames, in logic versus emotion, so that you have story and humanity as well as the logic, and we always need both. And then my final one is curiosity. If you can be curious about what the audience is thinking or maybe thinking, and curious about your topic, you're going to go well, because a lot of people get very hung up on being certain. And I'm seeing certainty from speakers a lot. And if it tips too far, it can become quite dominant and quite unappealing, because you get that sense that perhaps there isn't room for that openness.
That makes sense, and it's reassuring that we don't have to stand wherever we are and have some sort of rote presentation. We obviously have to have some content that's structured, that we're not going to talk about.
Oh yes, but I'm not saying that. Yes,
no,
yes.
not at all. But it's the same to me. It sounds like the same concept of having softening around the edges of your vision. It's softening around the edges of your presentation, so that you might change things up a little bit depending on how you're feeling the response of the audience. So it's that softness again, which feels really important. Feels
I like that.
Very human, a very human way of connecting and presenting rather than getting it right.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's so true. And not being overly prescriptive.
Yeah. So clarity, connection, contrast, and curiosity. I like the C's. I like all the C's. Easy to
I know.
remember.
Don't we love the C's? And there's so many of them. It's like you could go anywhere with the C's. But but they are 4 very good ones, and they do work. Yeah.
So I guess as we're starting to bring this conversation around, to its natural close, what I've been hearing is that beautiful transition that you've made over time, and it feels like you're really anchored in the way in which your business works now, and the importance of that communication that you're now sharing with others. So, what's the next chapter for you? Do you think where will the business evolve to? What feels like a natural next step for you? More of the same, without a doubt, because you're doing such great work in the world. But is there something else that's tickling at the edges of your curiosity?
Oh gosh, that's an interesting one, and I'm actually thinking about that right now. So I don't know quite what's shifted in me in the last couple of months, but it's definitely been this sense of, okay, I'm actually going to re-look at everything and just check, and where do I want to go now? And the only thing that I would say is possible, actually no, I lie. There are a few things, but the key thing that's coming up that is possible is potentially going and anchoring along with personal development, simply because so much of what I do, my clients will often say to me, oh gosh, this really is like personal development. And it's not just public speaking. It's so much more than that. And I never realized it would be. And I love doing all that work as well. So I'm just going, you know what, maybe there's a way that I could combine in a more overt way than I have been up until now. So I don't know. That's very, very early days.
It sounds intriguing, and it does what. If I'm sensing into that, it's another part of your own evolution. And I believe next chapters are definitely evolutions, not revolutions, because you took the tools here that were a part of solving your own challenge that you had all those years ago about the performance anxiety, the being able to stand and speak. But that in and of itself has been part of this amazingly complex personal growth journey. And so to then bring that piece forward and to combine that as the next logical and emotional evolution, it makes sense. I think you're onto something there, sweetheart.
Oh, well, there you go. Thank you for that one. Yes, it's certainly intriguing.
Oh, that's wonderful. So thinking about, just as the last, I guess, point, when you're thinking about the people who are listening to us right now, who are standing on that edge, who perhaps have a great business now and they're looking at, moving and pivoting into a new direction, or someone that is on the cusp and thinking of leaping, how would you encourage them to make the type of moves, not the exact same thing, but to take those sort of moves that you've been talking about with us?
Oh, I think it comes down to, there has to be a strong enough motivation, and then you have to keep tapping into it. And there's boldness, but there's boldness, as you said so rightly earlier, it's about doing it in your own way. And if there are things that you just go, you know what, that's just anathema to me, I just can't, that's so not me, then just don't even go there, because it's not going to work. So you work out the ways that you can start to shift, and that may well mean also, putting things in a schedule and a diary, and saying, okay, this is what I'm going to try. And you might want to give yourself a timeline, or you might not, but just experiment and be open and be willing. And with that, I just think things just naturally evolve. And so long as you're acting and taking action, it's not this idea that you just picture it and it will come. But if you're taking those actions, and even if you're taking the wrong actions, you will then be guided back. Yeah, to
absolutely.
Where you should be.
Me being quote queen today, you can't steer a parked car. We have to be in motion so that we can change direction. That makes perfect sense. So experiment, be open, be willing, just take those darn actions. Sarah, it's been a delight to have this conversation with you. Thank you for investing your time with us. And for people who are listening that I know will want to find out more about the way that you show up in the world, these services that you're providing, who are thinking about, yes, I could actually communicate more clearly, and this lady has the right sort of feel for me, because you have a big heart. We can certainly feel that. And having been on this own journey yourself, there'd be a lot of compassion, encouragement, as well as insight and experience. So, without a doubt. So where do we find
I get it. Yeah.
Where do we find you in the world, darling?
Oh, well, my website is improveyourpublicspeaking.com.au, and I've got a lot of articles and ideas on there, and some videos and things. I also am quite active on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me on that would be under my personal name for that
Beautiful.
one.
Okay.
That's probably the way to go.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure both of those links are on the podcast page as well, and as well as people are listening now. And I love the domain name. No wonder you had such great Google traction.
I know. I did that deliberately. I thought a long time about it. Yeah. And the other thing I have just quickly is I have a quick quiz if people are interested, using my particular space formula. So I have a little quiz if you want to do that, and I'll send you the link, Angela, if you want to put that on the page as well.
Absolutely. I'll pop that in there as well in the show notes. So if you're listening on your iPhone or smartphone, you can check the show notes and you'll find those links. Or, of course, you can come across to my website and you'll find Sarah and me under podcast. So thank you. And I look forward to finding out what that next chapter will look like as you begin to keep on evolving.
Sounds great. Oh, thank you so much, Angela. And there's Remy.
Actually, I think that's the neighbour's dog. That's
is it? Oh, right. Okay.
But Remy is looking with awe at that sound. Will I be like that when I grow up? It'll be interesting. So no, thanks again, Sarah. It's been a joy.
Thanks a lot, Angela. Bye.
Bye-bye. And to you, my lovely listener, thank you for investing your time listening to this conversation today. And hopefully what you're taking in from this is that it is possible for you to do that thing. You know, that thing that you've been thinking about for a while, whether that's a little shift in a new direction or a great big leap in terms of faith. But what I really want you to take away is the understanding that little by little. Remember, we overestimate what we can do in a month, but we underestimate what we can do in a year. So if you keep taking those small, consistent actions towards that vision that's got those lovely soft edges so that you're not boxed into the way things have to be, then before you know it, you could end up fully immersed in your own next chapter, making a difference to others, but also enjoying the heck out of it. And that's what this is about. I have a huge belief that your business needs to serve you just as much as you serve your clients. And you could hear the joy in what Sarah's doing and where she has evolved to. And just recognizing that fulfillment and contribution are the flip sides of a next chapter business, and it is absolutely possible to have both. So thank you again for spending the time with us. I'd love it if you could take a moment to perhaps leave a review for the podcast. There's instructions on how to do that on my website, or always with just a quick Google search. Having a review helps the podcast become more visible so that more women who are standing on the edge of their own next chapter can tap into these stories of inspiration and some really good advice on steps to take. And I'd love you to play a role in my world of helping that happen. So thanks again, and I will talk to you soon on the very next podcast. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Your Next Chapter podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love you to share it, perhaps leave a review in iTunes, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're looking for your own business breakthrough at the moment, then I've got something special for you. Visit angelarasmus.com/breakthrough guide. That e-guide takes you through the 4 key gaps to close that may be stopping you from reaching the next level in your business. I hope it's extremely helpful, and I look forward to talking with you again on the next episode.